When Sonic the Hedgehog first released in 1991, it really wouldn't take long for the popular character to find his way into a variety of unusual spin-offs that would be portrayed within completely different game genres. And a lot of these games would only be seen in Japan and even in the arcade. They are very rare, and in many cases a lot of people have never known or heard about them. So here we are going to take a look at 3 of these interesting titles that will give you a glimpse into the origins of this interesting character from Sega. The first of these spin-offs would come in the form of Waku Waku Sonic Car Patrol that would also release in 1991, not long after the legendary Blue Mascot's initial release on consoles with the Sega Mega Drive. But where this game differs from the platforming elements seen in the original game, Sonic in turn takes on the role of a police officer, where you are driving a car along a series of streets or even highway lanes, aiming to organise traffic, but you also have to deal with Dr. Eggman or Robotnik, who appears later in the level, where he is causing chaos and havoc as he is trying to throw bombs at you to destroy you. So you simply have to avoid the bombs, but you also have to get close enough that you can use your spin dash attack to jump and hit him in order to try and destroy the vehicle. But even so, after a period of time he will disappear, which will result in you completing the level, and then you will get a number of stars depending on how good your progress was. From what I have played of it, the game is relatively short and simple, as yes, it is aimed at a much younger generation, more so with kids, but it would also be the first Sonic game ever to have voice acting tied into the experience. While the narrative is in Japanese, Sonic does go into detail to tell you the unique story behind what he's doing and what objectives you have to complete along the way. The graphics themselves are very cutesy and very cartoony, and does play from a different perspective, from more of a top-down point of view, which is a far cry from the typical platformer element you would have seen in the more popular games on consoles. But this unusual spin-off would later be adapted into a 3-part comic book series that would appear in some of the issues of the Sonic the Hedgehog comic book later on.
Thank you!
Sega Sonic Cosmic Fighter is a 2D arcade shoot-'em-up viewed from a top-down perspective that originally saw a release in Japan in 1993 and would later find a Western release in Australia only, but in a limited capacity in 1997. There would also see an English translation being added to that edition that would follow the role once again of Sonic the Hedgehog, but this time as a space pilot, and his goal is to rid the galaxy of known threats from Dr. Robotnik, who is up to his tricks yet again. So you'll find yourself in the depths of space trying to take out a variety of different bots or enemies that get in your way, and the format of the game is very reminiscent of the classic Galaga, with enemies moving around the screen at different angles or throwing different shapes, and your goal is to try and eliminate as many as you can to increase your score. And then you will move into different areas that is like on board of a spaceship or on top of a space kind of platform or station, where you will meet Robotnik, who uses his ship to transform into a gigantic mechanical beast, and you'll have to use the weapons on Sonic's ship in order to eliminate all of the various body parts from all of the arms that Robotnik uses to attack you in order to try and defeat him. The gameplay on display is very simplistic, as yes, it is aimed at a much younger audience, but the graphics are highly detailed and they do reflect and look really well for what it's trying to do. But as you're playing through the levels and you meet certain objectives, you can be rewarded with specific ship upgrades that can also aid in your progress throughout each of the stages. But as in with a lot of these other Sonic spin-off games, generally they're very short in how they play out, but upon completing missions you're generally given a rating of 1 to 5 stars, which will give you an inclination of how well you've done throughout the experience. This game originally in the arcade would have had its own dedicated cabinet that would have been kitted out very like a miniature spaceship, which would have looked very very cool for its time. But this game also presents more speech and dialogue with its own interesting story that kind of explains what's going on. Again, it's another interesting experience in the Sonic universe, very different from all of the usual games we would have known and played growing up. Very rare indeed, for sure, but it might be worth a look if you're interested in looking back over the history of Sonic's universe. This is another one to try.
You're gonna pay for this!
You've done a good job keeping space peaceful. He will surely be back, though. Let's fight against him together. Let's check your results. You've done great! Well, we'll see you again. Thank you.
Sega Sonic the Hedgehog is quite possibly the most in-depth game on this list, that also saw a release in the arcade in Japan in 1993, being developed by Sega AM3, seeing you play the game from an isometric perspective, but the game also allows you to play as 3 different types of characters, both from Sonic themselves and newcomers with Mighty the Armadillo and Ray the Flying Squirrel, who have all been kidnapped by Dr. Eggman or Robotnik and been brought to an island that has been conducted as like a prison, and your goal is to try and escape the confines of this island through a total of 7 different levels that comprise of different environments, all with their own traps and hurdles and challenges to face, all while Dr. Robotnik is keeping an eye on you on your progress the whole time to ensure that you don't leave the island alive. But what's interesting about this particular game is the fact is that back in the day, if you were playing it in the arcade, you could play the game as one player, but if you had 3 friends together, you could play as all 3 characters all at the same time. That allowed you to play the game in a variety of different ways, from completing different challenges but also to try and run away from oncoming threats. The game can be quite tricky to master, even though the levels themselves aren't overly long, but some levels will cause more headaches than others, especially later on. But you are limited in terms of the lives that you have. Obviously, with it being an arcade experience, you could find yourself spending a lot of money in this until you finish it, but it does get very difficult later on. I can vouch for that, definitely, from having spent time playing it. Now, there are only a few basic enemy types that will appear. Some of them really can't be killed at all, you just have to kind of avoid them, and usually you'll have to fight some sort of boss at different points throughout the game, where you'll have to face off against Dr. Eggman towards the end. But what's interesting about this, because it's played from that isometric perspective, this was even before Sonic 3D Blast had come out on the likes of the Mega Drive, so you can definitely see where the influences came from. But even when you look at the visuals, it's highly detailed and looks way beyond and even ahead of its time in many ways, especially with the level of animations and gameplay aesthetics that are on display. A different yet worthwhile and challenging experience that if you have the opportunity to play this is one that's definitely worth a look. It is challenging, yes, but it will present an entirely different experience within the Sonic universe itself. Even in terms of overall reviews, the game was well received when it did release in the arcades, as it was totally different from what had been seen before, but added a whole different perspective of the way you could play Sonic games. But with the introduction of these distinctive characters also helped to pave the way for them to appear in other games later on within the Sonic universe as well. It is tough, it will take a lot of tries in order to try and get through it. In some cases you mightn't get through it on the first couple of attempts, and even trying to get the characters to run at full speed can be tricky to master, I will admit. But yeah, it's definitely one I would recommend to try if you get the chance. The games presented here showcase some of the earliest ideas and spin-offs within the Sonic universe, and when we really look back, the whole history of the Sonic franchise is so diverse in its variety of games that had come to light, both from platformers to shooters, pretty much anything they could think of that you could pop the Sonic character into. Sega were willing to take those risks, and in some ways they paid off, in other ways maybe not so much. Some have even been lost to time, but luckily here with this video, hopefully it will share some insights into the unique history behind this popular character from Sega, as there is a lot more to the Sonic universe that we never thought existed. But this is only scratching the surface of what else is possible within the Sonic franchise itself, as there are a lot more unusual games and quirky elements to discover, which we can look at here in this next video.